There's been a lot of Pro Controller news this month for the PS4. There's a lot of new designs coming out, and one of the first ones I've been able to get a hands-on with is also one of the more interesting design decisions, and that's the Razer Raion. Now, in a way, the Razer Raion is the first of its kind. Not that it's the first ever Pro Controller or first ever fight pad, but the first ever, well, something that's both of those things. If you're not familiar with fight pads, normally when it comes to controllers that are dedicated to fighting games, you either have sticks, which are the, giant arcade sticks that feel like an actual arcade setup with multiple buttons, stick design, so on and so forth. But then there are also fight pads like this right here. Now, the idea behind a fighting pad is to offer something that's a little more familiar to people who grew up playing fighting games on console, while still also having a specially designed layout for fighting games in mind, especially Street Fighter and a lot of the more 6-button name style games. The main decisions come from having a D-pad, no sticks, and 6 front-facing buttons rather than 4. Now, what makes the Razer Raion kind of a first in this, though, is that usually, historically, fight pads are a much more affordable option than fight sticks. Usually you're seeing them in the $40 to $60 range, something that's equal to a standard controller, but not anything that's going to be a Pro Controller level price. On the other hand, arcade sticks, while there are cheap options, there are a lot of very expensive, very nice options out there. The Razer Raion walks that line by being a fight pad, but costing considerably more than the average one at $100. And the reasoning behind that increased price point is that the Raion is the first sort of pro-level controller design applied to a fighting game layout. So we're going to go over what actual features it has and whether or not the improvements are worth that additional $40 to $60. Now, I think it's a really common perception in a lot of people's minds that when it comes to buying an awesome controller for fighting games, people tend to gravitate towards fight sticks, which I totally get, especially if you grew up playing games in an arcade. That is a very familiar experience, and it's really nice. And I also definitely spent some time kind of delving into buying really nice fight sticks and still like using them. But at my heart, I got to admit, there's something about a fight pad that just feels a lot more like home for me. I grew up mostly playing fighting games on console, not in arcades. For instance, I spent I don't know how many hours playing Street Fighter 2 with my brother on SNES. I wasn't very good at it, but that was where I really started kind of developing my love of fighting games, and so a pad just feels a little more natural to me. Now, if the Raion looks at all familiar to you, it's probably because it has a very similar overall shape design to Razer's other more traditional Pro Controller option, the Raion. It has a very similar base body and grip design, which I do find to be really comfortable. Now, as far as special features and functions go, there are a couple quality of life ones it has that are somewhat normal in fight pads. You have a switch that allows you to change what the D-pad reads as. By default, it'll be in D-pad mode, but you can switch it over to being left stick or right stick. There are some fighting games where this makes an important difference, or there might just be some weird specific situations where you need to have it act as a right stick for something. Now, as for this other switch on the bottom, this is allowing you to add additional buttons that are technically missing from the controller. Now, by default, it has 2 R1s, 2 R2s, and then a single set of L1 and L2s. But if you use the switch right here, it's going to move both the L1 and L2 to being on the right side, and the left shoulder buttons are now going to act as L3 and R3. So if there's any games where having a stick click is really important, that option can now be there. Or if you just want more buttons to choose from when using in-game remapping options, that's going to open it up as well. Now, as for these 2 buttons on the front bottom, these are used for audio controls. You do have the ability to plug in a 3.5mm headset right here, and with these controls you can mute the mic or adjust the volume by holding this button and using the D-pad up and down. An additional function they offer, though, that is specially designed for a fight pad and something really cool is that if you hit both of them at the same time, it activates a special mode on the controller that disables the PlayStation Home button, the Options button, and the Share button. So if you ever get really frantic in a match, or you have a bad habit of just hitting one of those buttons kind of idly when you're not paying attention, this makes sure that you're not going to accidentally throw off a match or interrupt things in between settings by just having them do nothing. Also, as is pretty standard of any kind of fighting controller design, this is a dedicated wired connection. There is no way to use this controller wirelessly, and the reason for that is because fighting games, more than any other genre, having the lowest input latency possible is extremely important, so you need to have a dedicated wired connection to ensure that. Now, all these features are all well and good, but the really big stuff that really pushes the idea of why the Raion should be worth its money is the button quality, specifically on the D-pad and the front-facing buttons. Now, the D-pad on this actually makes use of the mechanical tactile button setup that they have for the front-facing buttons on the Raion, where it has this nice little delightful clip. And what's really interesting about this from a D-pad perspective is that it gives you a very clear sense of knowing when you've hit a specific direction, not only for the up, down, left, right, but also for all the diagonals. So you'll actually know, yes, I definitely did a down to forward input because I heard all 3 clicks for the down, the diagonal, and the forward. As for the 6 front-facing buttons, these actually don't use the kind of clicky sets that you would find on the Raion, but instead rely on Razer's own proprietary yellow switches. And what their yellow mechanical switches are meant to be is to have that very low actuation force and just very quick and light button presses. So it's not clicky and it doesn't give a lot of resistance and is designed for very fast and rapid presses. This is actually very similar to the kind of mechanical buttons you would find on a fight stick, and so it feels very much at home on this controller. It's not exactly what you would necessarily expect to have when you first open and try it out, but it feels very much like home once you start using it. It's also worth pointing out that all the front-facing buttons on the Raion are larger than what you would find on most standard controllers. Part of the logic for this is that because they are larger, it's harder to accidentally miss an input if you're trying to do things very frantically and quickly. It also makes it so that you can use the controller in a traditional grip design like this if you like, or you can use a slightly more arcade style input by gripping the D-pad like a normal controller and then placing your other hand over the buttons like this. One last feature I want to point out too that's just a nice little extra thing to have is that while this is a licensed and branded PS4 controller, you can also make use of this on PC. You just have to flip the little switch here on the back to PC mode, plug into your computer, it'll install any firmware you need to use, and it's good to go right off the bat. This doesn't work with any of Razer's other specialty software because it doesn't have any kind of lights or anything to customize for RGB, nor does it have reprogrammable buttons outside of what you can do with the switches on the bottom here. So do all the features that the Raion has warrant it being considered a pro version of a regular fight pad? I'm leaning towards yes. There are things about it that I really like, and some things I'm a little more mixed and light on. I love the D-pad on it. The idea of actually having a tactile response click to each directional and feeling it as you're doing circular inputs is awesome. It's not quite the exact same feeling as using an actual classic D-pad, but it walks this really nice line between having that kind of smoothness and circular motion, while still having that feedback effect that clickier, kind of more modern style D-pads have. As for the front-facing 6 buttons, I will say it takes a little getting used to. While it does have that kind of arcade stick button feeling, it's not an arcade stick, it's a control pad. So there's a little bit of a disconnect mentally, I think, when you first start using it. And it does feel more natural when using it in this sort of claw-style position as opposed to a regular 4-button setup, especially because I find a lot of times when I was first using the controller, I wanted to favor these buttons over these buttons because this is actually where 4 buttons normally kind of lie, and having the R1 and R2 up there throws it off a little bit. Now, this is definitely something that you can get used to, and as I used the controller longer and longer, it felt more and more natural, but it did take some time to actually adapt as opposed to something that just kind of worked right out of the box when I first started using it. One thing that I will say that I thought would have bothered me at first, but actually didn't in the long run, is the weight of the controller. Traditionally, kind of an argument I've made a lot of times is that I'm not a big fan of super light controllers. There's just a quality to them that feels cheaper, even if the controller in mind actually isn't at all. And this is a very light controller, but in the situation where you are holding it in that more kind of claw style, it actually feels better that way. I don't mind the lightness on it. I think part of me would still prefer a bit more weight to it, but it's not a distraction that I feel bad about it being so light. You know, I think at the end of the day, when I think about buying this versus some of the more traditional kind of fight pads out there, I think the upgrades it has are significant enough that it is definitely worth paying the extra money. I don't think it's a large enough gap that it makes the other options completely irrelevant. I think there is room for debating of, do I want to spend the extra money? Will I still get a good solid experience if I want to spend 40 or 60 instead? I think there's still room for that. But if you are down to spend $100, this thing is awesome. Now, something else worth considering is that $100 is the MSRP for this controller. It is currently not available in North American areas. You cannot get it in the US or Canada directly from Razer right now, but you can import it from the areas that it is available in, which means that while it is a list price of $100, you're probably going to end up spending a little bit more money because it is an import. It's worth pointing out that I think there are plans to make it available in the US eventually, but there's just nothing concretely announced just yet, so you could hold off and wait and hopefully see that it comes here, or if you just want to get your hands on it as soon as possible, go for that import option. If you're a fighting game fan and you love the feeling of using a pad instead of a regular fight stick, this is definitely worth taking a look at. Just for that mechano-tactile D-pad alone, I love it.